point is getting through. How do you read? I'm going to pass around. Oh no, I'll give this to you at the end of the talk. Let me just hang on to it for now. I want you to put together that abstract before you read the original abstract. So later on, read the entire article, and she'll keep the abstract. When you're done with that assignment, you come and take it and compare what you've done. But when you have to read, it helps to read the abstract, the introduction, the discussion, and the conclusion. First pass, the abstract, the introduction, the discussion, the conclusion. Now, the advantage of doing it this way is that you avoid those sections of the article that are likely to demoralize you. The theories, the methodologies, and the complex statistics, right? Because the perfectionists among us, when we get to that point where we don't understand what they're doing, then it's a major world crisis. And people go into depression for a week. So this saves you having to deal with that. And it turns out that it's quite an effective way to read, because as I will show you, by reading these portions of the article, you can actually get what it is about without reading everything. Isn't that sweet? Yeah. And for those of us who love shortcuts, this is good. Now, what's in the abstract? The abstract is typically the summary of the paper. It would include what was done. It would include what they found. And it will include some indication of what it means. In other words, if it's a well-written abstract, it will also answer, in addition to what was done, what was found, a question, so what? Yeah? So the one question you can raise if you've read the abstract of the article is what problem was discussed and what results were found. So the abstract, if it's a good abstract, already addresses those questions. The benefit of the abstract, therefore, is that you can then decide if the article you have in front of you is relevant to the area you're trying to study. And if it's not, you quietly drop it. Yeah? Because remember we said, if you wanted 40 articles, you need to find 80. So reading the abstract alone allows you to find which 40 you're supposed to throw away. Yeah, or at least which 20 you can quickly throw away on the spot. The introduction is a bit bigger, in some cases quite very much bigger than the abstract, because it does provide a context for the research. It creates, or it allows the reader to see the motivation, why we need to discuss this topic. And typically, it defends the need to do this with very good referencing and very logical arguments. Now, what students love to do is, when they have to write their own problem formulation, it's not backed by any evidence, and sometimes the arguments are not logical. Now, one of the things I've told my students is that don't just read the articles, try to observe how they write the articles. Because you will be required to do exactly the same, or get close to doing it. And the introduction also provides you with background information. What led to this? Now, it's anybody can write an article on the regeneration of Johannesburg. Now, it would be difficult to see the point of anybody wanting to study the regeneration of Johannesburg without some background information or how the city was declined, right? unless you understand how the study went into decline and the consequence of that decline, you probably don't understand why we need to go and study why, if there's regeneration is working or not. So, in many cases, in the introduction part of the paper, you will see some contextual information on why this study was done, what led up to this. So, the one question you need to raise when you read the introduction of your paper is if you understand the background for the work and if you accept why the study needed to be done. And it has one implication. When you write your own research, you need to provide reasons why what you're trying to do needs to be done. Because it is not self-evident. And in the scientific community, even if it is obvious, we do not take it as self-evident. You need to still articulate why the study needs to be done. Okay? It's a rule. Explain to us why we need to read the rest. And the other thing about the introduction is that depending on the way you write it, you encourage the reader to continue reading, or you make it difficult for the reader to continue reading. And so all the things you've read, you realize there are some articles you read them and you want to read everything. And then there are some articles you read them and you want to drop it because it's like, oh, this is going to be boring. Well, when you write, remember that. You need to make us want to read the rest of what you've written. Yeah? Okay. What do you find in the discussions? In the discussion part of the article, they summarize the main findings. If it's a well-written paper, in the discussion, they will summarize the main findings, and they will tell you they will explain the reasons for the conclusions that they're drawing from the findings. In other words, in the discussion, they not only summarize the main results, but also explain what the results mean. Yes? So you quickly realize that if you read the abstract and you read the introduction and the conclusion, in many cases, if it's a well-written article, you can find out what the article is about without reading the entire article. Because what I gave you contains some killer regression analysis that if you're not a econometrician, won't understand. And if this one of the articles you've actually read for your area, you probably see those numbers and you're like, oh, let me go get a glass of water. Right. Now, another professor, she's Irish, says, okay, this is how you take notes. So, no, even before I get here, remember this. To read, go to the abstract, read the introduction, discussion, and conclusion. Yes? That gives you a rough idea what the article is about. Then you read the entire article. Then you can use that template to try to compose the abstract. In this case, we took away the abstract, so you have only the introduction, the discussion, and conclusion. And then if you do the second pass, you understand the article enough to want to write your own abstract for the article. So sometimes, once you go through the mandatory things you need to do for this course, sometimes the easiest way to write a note for the articles you read is block the abstract, read the articles the way I've told you, and try to compose your own abstract. That really helps you understand what you read. Now the other thing to do is try to write in one word a sentence what the article is about once you've read it after the introduction, discussion, and conclusion. And then decide for yourself if it's relevant or not. If it's not relevant, you let it go. And if it is relevant, you read it again more slowly. But once you start reading the second time, it helps to begin to identify points of interest. Now, if you're new to the area, the first articles you read, you really don't know what the key issues are yet, right? But once you've read the second and the third articles, you begin to see a pattern begin to emerge. You might then find yourself identifying points of interest that are relevant to what you're trying to do. You will find yourself trying to summarize key points. Now, here's what I tell my students. If you want to write notes, put the article aside completely before you write. If you're looking at an article as you write your notes, you're very likely to copy it. If you're not looking at an article and you try to write from memory, you're more likely to paraphrase, use your own words. If you have it right in front of you, you're doing this, unconsciously what you do, you copy. Now, so one of the first steps that you take to protect yourself from plagiarizing is the way you write your notes. So if you make very good notes, you're less likely to plagiarize. Put the article away and try to write it in your own words. That's one of the first ways of immunizing yourself from plagiarizing. Because you're likely to paraphrase or summarize. Also try to identify areas of the articles you don't understand. Now, in my university, we would only allow you to do a dissertation in areas we understand, which means that if you've been reading, you probably come to me with some of the articles you don't understand, and I could probably help you discuss it. So it helps when you're reading to identify areas you don't understand, because if you have your supervisory meetings, you can say, well, I don't understand this, but can you explain it to me? And as you read more and more, you will notice elements in some of these articles that differ from similar elements in the other articles. You may realize that they're all discussing the same area and they're probably coming to opposite conclusions on a particular phenomenon. So you begin to see contrast. Now, some of what you have to do in your literature review is to show areas of agreement and disagreement between different authors on the subject. Now, you can only do that when you begin to notice the differences in the conclusions different authors draw from on the same subject. So your notes are the first part, your notes are the first point where you begin to see if there are any similarities or differences between what everybody else is doing about a particular subject. Now, you might, from the first articles you read, have certain ideas about what you think is happening in terms of a particular phenomenon. What I tell my students is that you're doing research. Research is iterative. So the deeper you get into the subject, the more you realize that you might need to revise some of the earlier notions you have about what you're doing. Look, when I started my research, which is the reason I hit my first literature review, okay? I thought I understood what that thing was about. Towards the end, I realized a lot of what I thought was a problem wasn't a problem at all. So as your knowledge of the subject progresses, and as you read more, you realize you might have to go back and revise some of your earlier notions of what it is you're trying to do. Now, most people find that back and forth movement. They take it personally. They think it's because they're not good. Right? Yeah, some people love going into your heads and having that conversation. I knew this was going to be bad. I knew it was a mistake to come back to school. I should have stayed in my job. I'm never good at anything. This is just the latest proof, the long line of proofs I've had that I'm never going to be good at this. Get off that conversation. Research is iterative. It's back and forth, back and forth. Okay? Even experienced researchers do it back and forth, back and forth. It's just the way it's the nature of research. It's nothing to do with you. So stop taking it so personally. There's nothing wrong with it. And then the third step is take down the references. The full references. Preferably in the format in which your university requires it. What's the format here, ABA or Harvard? So do the Harvard referencing on the spot. And preferably do it electronically so you can copy and paste later on. Because then your reference is already done. See, these are labor-saving devices. They do take time, but you notice you save a lot of work down the road. All right. So here's what we're going to do again. What time is it? Oh, are we approaching another break time?
Yes, I can have muffins now.
Oh, you can have muffins now. Yeah. Okay, so let's have muffins and we'll do one more exercise. There's not enough muffins for the entire class, so if you don't get there quickly, you're not going to make it. Okay, so we're going to do another exercise where you take the same article, but this time around, we're only going to look at the introduction. Okay, we're only going to look at the introduction. Now, if you take the instructions that I gave you, you look at the surface paper, the first paper at the top of that pile, and let's walk through what it says. Now, this exercise is meant to help you understand how to develop a fundamental part of your paper, the introductory paragraphs, okay? Just the introduction part. Now, the essential purpose of the introduction is to capture the reader's attention and make them interested in the subject you want to discuss. That's what the introduction does. You need to use it to capture the reader's attention and make them interested in the subject you're trying to discuss. So the introduction is what sets the stage for the paper, and it is what puts your topic in perspective. Remember, we said it shows what was done and why it needs to be done. So it means that the introduction should contain attention-grabbing and general statements about the need for the study. You use facts, illustrations, statistics, or sometimes quotes to set the tone. So one question to ask when you're done writing the introduction is to ask yourself, would I continue to read the rest of the paper if someone else wrote it? And so the question you should ask yourself when you've read the introduction for this paper is, do I really want to read the rest of this? The introduction will typically consist of the statement of the problem, the purpose of the study, and the significance of the study. Now let's look at the problem statement. It turns out that the problem statement is the heart of the work you're going to do. It typically contains a single sentence with a few extra paragraphs that allow you to explain the problem. Now, in the problem statement, you're exploring an issue or a phenomenon that has been overlooked, an issue or problem that needs investigation, discussion, or debate, existing methods or processes that no longer seem to be working. For example, last year, one group of students I was supervising did some research on
the environmental consequences of the regeneration that has taken place in Johannesburg. Now, their research problem essentially consisted of the fact that prior studies have evaluated the social impacts and the economic impacts and have overlooked the environmental impacts. Okay? In other words, they found a lot of studies that have looked at the social consequences of the regeneration and the economic consequences of the regeneration, but have not looked at the environmental consequences. All right? So their problem statement was that they were trying to look at a phenomenon that has been overlooked. Now I've put a number of examples there that you can see how the actual problems are formulated. But here's what I want you to look at, the paragraph 3 of the second page. While the problem statement itself is usually a single sentence, sometimes more than one, it is always accompanied by a few extra sentences or paragraphs that explain the problem. Because the problem statement usually is one sentence, but it's usually contained in a paragraph that puts it in perspective. Each sentence or paragraphs enable you to persuade the reader on why the problem is worth looking into. And it is often useful to include opinions of others, usually prior researchers. And prior researchers and the research they've done allows you to do what we call substantiating the problem. So you need to use these statements or paragraphs to explain how the problems relate to general economic, social, or political trends by presenting facts, statistics that demonstrate the scope and how serious the problem is. So it helps if you can try to give vivid and concrete examples of the problem. So when you're done with the introduction, typically for your assignment, you should be able to confirm to yourself that you can easily make out a single statement that is a problem statement. So that's about a problem statement alone. What about the purpose? The purpose is usually a single statement or paragraph that explains what the study intends to accomplish. Now, a few typical statements would be the goal of the study is to discuss blah, blah, blah. The goal of the study is to review. The goal of the study is to understand the causes and effects of some phenomenon. The goal of the study is to improve our understanding of something or provide a new way of looking at something or understand what makes a particular process successful or unsuccessful. So that's how you formulate the purpose of your study. What about the significance of the study? Well, that section typically creates a standpoint from which the problem can be viewed. It would usually point out how your study fits into the bigger picture, and you not need to use that section to persuade the reader and align him to the purpose of your study. Because that is what makes the study worth pursuing in the first place. So the significance of the study should answer the question, why is the study important? To whom is it important? And what benefits will occur if the study is done, right? Now, what I want us to do is to take that article that you read. I want you to read the introduction again. And I want you to identify the paragraph that contains, the paragraph or paragraphs that contain the problem statement. If possible, underline the sentence or sentences that is the problem statement. Okay? And then I want you to then classify the problem statement. Is it an issue that has been overlooked? Is it a controversy that has not been resolved? Is it a phenomenon that is not well understood? Is it a concept that is not well defined, etc.? Now, for each of these problems, I want you to determine whether the author has justified the importance of the problem by showing how it resolves a controversy, how it provides empirical proof of theory, or have they done it by identifying potential benefits and the beneficiaries of the study, or have they argued for the social, economic, policy impacts of the study? Okay? So, this is what I want you to do. Take the article, read just the introduction. Identify the paragraphs where the problem statement is hidden. Underline the sentences the sentence or sentences that is a problem, actual statement of the problem, and then classify the nature of the problems they highlighted, and for each problem, determine how the authors justify the importance of the problem. Do we all understand what we need to do? So go for it. Okay. Everybody done reading the introduction?
Yes, we have answered all the questions 1, 2, 3, 4, up until 4.5.
Well, let's just work through it, and wherever we get to, if time is up, you just do the rest at home. But the purpose of the exercise is to get you to internalize the style of writing introductions. Remember, this is one format. You read other papers and you would see that they would check the same boxes, except that it comes in a different sequence, right? And one of the things is that when you're not an experienced researcher, unless somebody points you to this, unless you do exercises like this, you don't even notice the differences in how these things are done, right? So what we're trying to do is to get you not only become familiar with an area you want to research into, but also to take an article and see where the jewelry is buried and extract it without having to read everything. Or you read everything, but you're able to catch a lot out of it quicker because you know what's where, right? So, and you know, some of these things are so explicit you can pick it up on the spot, and some of these things are debatable. So what we're about to do is not an exact science, but it helps you begin to internalize how this thing is supposed to look like. Now, when I look at this paper, I noticed they started off actually by articulating a central research question. You see that immediately in the first paragraph. Did everybody see that? Yes. What was the central question? A faculty member is paid according to the levels of performance or other sets of determinants. Now, the thing with faculty pay is I can sit here and talk to you for 3 hours. So I'd have checked the box that I was actually present in class. What is debatable, though, is if I said something useful in those 3 hours, right? So the question is, am I being paid according to the number of hours in class, or am I being paid according to the quality of the number of hours in class? So now we happen as university teachers to belong to the kind of work where you cannot easily measure our performance. You could probably easily measure the quantity of our performance, but it's a little bit slippery to measure the quality of our performance. So this is the question he has tried to tackle. Are they paid based on performance or some other factors? A friend of mine said he looked for a job in Nigeria. He wanted a position as a professor. And the first question they asked him is, how old are you? So are you going to be placed in a university according to how old you are or because of your... Okay? So that's a central question. Are we being paid according to the level of performance, or are there other factors at play? Has everybody got that? Good. So, what is the nature of the problem here? Now, I gave you a number of typologies. Now, there are papers where it is one typology, falls neatly into one class, or there's times when the problem is complex that it fulfills more than one typology, right? So what is the nature of the problem here? Is it an overlooked issue? Is it an unresolved controversy? Is it a phenomenon not well understood? Is it a concept not well defined? No. So it's something between B and C, right? Now, what is the clue? What statement led you to that conclusion?
The first, in the introduction there,
Yeah?
faculty statement, faculty members, that sentence,
A faculty member is paid according to their levels of performance, some other sets of determinants.
no, that's one, or faculty members play vital role, then the last sentence there is structures university professors still remains clouded in the controversy amongst both academics.
Okay, so it's an unresolved controversy. The other evidence that it's an unresolved controversy is in the next paragraph. Previous research has yielded mixed results. So it means that the jury is still out. Mixed results. Some people think it's A, some people think it's B. So, I don't mean the A and B thing I gave you, but what I mean is some people think this is the nature of the problem, and some people think this is the nature of the problem. So it's an unresolved controversy. But it's also a phenomenon that is not well understood, right? Okay. Yes. Oh, okay, she's not happy. Okay, about the first one. Which is the first one?
The problem statement.
Oh, we haven't gotten to the problem statement yet.
Not yet.
No. We just classified the nature of the problem. What is the nature of the problem? Yes. Yes. Then, yes.
The first sentence, what about the first sentence?
Which person?
The distribution
Distribution
of
of
rewards.
rewards among faculty members in
What if I
universities.
say that is the nature of the
That is the nature of the problem. How rewards are
in
distributed
short, in summary?
among faculty members.
Oh, the distribution of rewards has been of interest. No, that's just a description of the phenomenon. We're looking at how people get paid. That's just a description of the phenomenon. Yeah, this is what we're going to be talking about. But what is the nature of the problem we're going to explore? We're going to explore an unresolved controversy, and we're going to explore this phenomenon because it's not been well understood, right? So the phenomenon is the distribution of rewards. How reward is allocated by management, by universities. Yes? Okay. So, where are the problem statements? You could say, yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Did you ask us?
Yes. Tell me
Okay.
what the problem statements are.
The main problem there is on the first page,
Right.
where it says, all faculty members paid according to their levels of performance or some other set of determinants. That's the first problem, because they want to find out the levels of performance and pay.
Okay. I would say that that is rather the central research question rather than the research problem. Now, it turns out that a research question typically derives from a research problem. In most of the papers you would read, they will formulate the problem first, and from the problem derive the questions. what this guy has done is to pose a question first and then use it. So he's done it in reverse order. So it's a little confusing. If you're not experienced and you don't know what form it takes, you might think. So what he did is start by articulating a research question and then working it backwards. But the usual pattern is that you start formulating the problem, highlight the importance of the problem, and the purpose of the study, and then the research questions you're going to answer later on. So he's done it in a bit of a mixed up way. But the thing about writers is that sometimes they think doing it in a particular way is monotonous, so they like to vary the style a little bit. But what are the problem statements? I think the central problem is the fact that previous studies has yielded mixed results. I think that's primary. That's a primary problem. Previous studies has yielded mixed results. Some people found relation between the number of publications and pay, but no link between teaching and pay. Other people found no relation between pay and the various performance measures at all. And some people found a small relationship. So you notice that the rest of the paragraph is just explaining, giving more details about the opening statement, which is previous research has yielded mixed results. So you notice what I said. You formulate a problem and you spend the rest of the paragraph explaining the problem, showing why you cast the problem the way you cast it. So you realize the rest of the paragraph simply provides further evidence of why this, further proof. And this time you notice with references. That is called substantiating your problem, proving it is indeed a problem. Right? Okay. So you don't make statements and provide no evidence to back it up. Otherwise, some Thomas in the room is going to, how do you know? Were you there? Right? It's very important. Then towards the end of that paragraph, he addresses a second problem. That even these previous studies were by themselves problematic. Have you noticed? That even the previous research, apart from the fact that they are not conclusive, were themselves problematic. And then he goes 1, 2, 3, 4, showing the problems with previous studies. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So by the time you get through this, you're quite clear, oh, we need to discuss this. This guy has reason to write this paper. And you notice that, and also by the time you get through this, you notice it's consequential because it means that depending on how you pay people like me, you're either getting good education or you're not. Right? The way he has explained the problem leaves you totally convinced it's important to know how teachers are paid, because that could mean the difference between good education and bad education. Right? So when you do your research and you write in the introductory paragraphs, by the time you're done with your introduction, the reader should be convinced there is a reason to discuss this issue. I mean, he leaves you in no doubt, this is a biggie. We need to explore it. Right? Is there anybody who wonders why anybody bothered to write a paper like this? Is anybody wondering why it should have been done? Does anybody think the editor should not have published this paper? No? Everybody agrees this is an important paper. It makes a definite contribution to knowledge on this subject. Well, that's exactly what you need to do when you're writing your paper. And so for the rest of the reading you do, it's very important that you spend some time, once you've read the abstract, on dissecting the introduction, the way we've done it. That allows you to get to the heart of the papers. And if you do this systematically, you begin to internalize the structure, which is the best guarantee that when it comes to time for you to write, you will do the same. So you can read, see, so this is what happened. How we finally figured out what to do for our PhDs was when we finally understood there's some structure to this. Before then, we were just reading, and we didn't even know where to look. So we spent a number of years in the wilderness simply because you're reading. You don't even know that there is a structure to these things. There's a format, there's a tradition around it, and that the jewels are buried in specific places. And they are not self-evident unless somebody points you to it. Which means that you might read a lot of papers and think you understand it, except that when you have to write it, you don't know where to start from. So the purpose of this exercise is not only to help you understand, but it's also meant to help you understand how it's to be done. Because you can easily read and not know how to do it yourself. Right? Do you have any questions? Yes.
I just wanted to find out,
Yeah.
is there a difference between a problem and a problem statement? If there is, how do you differentiate it?
No, the problem, if there is a problem, the problem is articulated in the problem statement. Yes? The problem statement is your articulation. This thing is something we don't know about. We know everything around it, but we don't know this part of it. We know about the social and economic impacts of urban regeneration in the inner city of Johannesburg, but no one has discussed the environmental consequences. No one has gone around to find out where people are throwing garbage after the areas have been regenerated. Nobody knows where wastewater is going. Nobody knows if we're using the same levels of electricity or less or more. Nobody knows how people go to work. Do they walk? Do they use public transport? Has the regeneration affected the amount of cars being used in the inner city? We don't know. But we do know that it has affected people's incomes. We do know that it has affected people's social lives. But we don't know anything about the impact on the environment. And you know that the city is a big, what do I call it? How do you call this? I've forgotten the term. You know, cities generate use a lot of energy, electricity, they use fuel, they also generate a lot of waste and pollution, which means that if you're doing an urban regeneration program and you don't pay attention to this, you know how much pollution there is in China, right? Yeah. So you can industrialize, you can build fancy cities, and if you don't pay attention to this, all the little kids are going to get asthmatic. And then there's, it's almost as if it's counterproductive, which meant that if anybody goes out there to try to evaluate the regeneration that's been done, it's not enough to look at the economic and the social impacts. It's just as important. So what my students try to do is to look at the social and the environmental impacts. So their problem statement was that previous studies have addressed 2 impacts and not the third. So there is a problem. And the problem statement is the articulation in a particular sentence with examples. So they're like, for example, Mr. X studied this, Mr. Y studied that, Mr. Z studied that, but none of these people have looked at this. And then it leaves you convinced, yeah, these people have done their homework, right? Which means it's difficult to convince anybody there's a research problem if you're not able to substantiate it with either examples from practice or examples from prior research. Yes, you're going to ask a question.
After the research and the problem statement,
Yes, yes,
the author went ahead to provide an example.
yes.
Why would he want to go further to substantiate further for other points?
Because the second problem there was that apart from the fact that previous studies have not been conclusive, each of these studies in themselves have been problematic in the sense of the way they were carried out. So he did, And that tells you the quality of the work is done. Meaning that he's not only trying to resolve an unresolved issue, he's also trying to do it in a way that is methodologically superior. I mean, I met this guy in Brussels in 2009, and in our field of reward management, he's one of the giants, because this is the kind of stuff he does. And people like me are like acolytes, apprentices, as far as this guy is concerned. He does very thorough studies, which is the reason he has a respect in the research community, because, you know, you can see this is a paper written by a big gun. Yeah.
It seems like it already said it all.
Yes, very thorough work. This is very, very thorough work.
After the research problem statement,
Mm-hmm.
we now went further to state some examples.
Yes.
But it already said it all.
No, but you would, if you read the rest of the paper, you notice that those 4 things that he has actually highlighted, they also address in the study. So the study is not just trying to resolve the controversy, but also to do it in a way that is methodologically appropriate. So he's making 2 sets of contributions. One, trying to resolve an empirical issue, but also bring methodological rigor. Now, I'll probably send a paper to your teacher on how to make research contributions. And you'll notice that one area in which you can make a research contribution is method. You can make research contribution in theory by devising a theory. You can also make a research contribution by actually collecting data and solving a problem. So in this paper, there are 2 types of research contribution that you see. The empirical work that they have done. No, actually there are 3 types of contributions. One, they've done some empirical work to address a problem. 2, previous studies have been theoretical. They use agency theory, so they've brought in application of theory. And 3, they've done it in a way that captures more fully what teachers do. So there are 3 contributions in one paper. Many researchers will do 1 contribution per paper. And if you're an experienced researcher, that's how you know this guy is a big gun, because he has made 3 types of contributions to the paper. Yeah. So that's how you know. I have 4 types. Yeah. That's how you know who the big guns are and who are the apprentices. Yes.
What would be your advice on the problem state, on the idea of linking, of making sure that your problem statement is in line with your research questions before even going?
Well, the research questions must logically derive from the problem statement. Okay? Now, if you ask me for strategy how to arrive at the problem statement, this is what I make my students do. In the typical dissertation, the literature review comes in chapter 2, right? I tend to make my students do a literature review first, because that guarantees that they've actually read around the thing and actually try to analyze what they've read and actually put some structure on it. And I always tell them, your problem statement, your research questions should read like the logical conclusion of your literature review. And if they don't, you're in trouble. Because that's the reason you do the literature review, to provide context and justification for the problem statement and the research questions. So if your problem statement and research questions do not serve as logical conclusions to your literature review has failed. So even though your problem statement and research questions tend to come in chapter 1, they're actually the consequence of what you do in chapter 2. So if you don't do a good literature analysis, you're in no position to formulate a problem statement, because you won't know what the gaps in the knowledge are, you won't know what the unresolved controversies are, you won't know phenomena that are not well understood, you wouldn't know about methods that are no longer working, you wouldn't know. And if you make those claims, you won't be able to prove it because you haven't read anything. So I make my students do the literature review first. But, you know, remember, traditions differ from university to university, and there are various alternative ways of arriving at the same thing. So don't kill your professor for not doing it.
Are we making them do it now?
Oh.
They're reading now, we get to the problem of this one.
Oh, so you're doing it? Ah, so you better fall in line. Okay, you make, okay, good.
Then we start, they have a whole break now until the 11th of April. Until the 9th. Around the 9th of April, with some articles.
Okay.
Pictures of yourself on the beach, reading. Pictures of yourself at home, reading. Pictures of yourself everywhere. You can make nice blogs.
Or you can put all the photos in Facebook. Let's see you reading. Create a nice Facebook page.
Reading, nice glasses.
A cup of coffee.
No highlighter.
No highlighters. I'm taking the highlighters away. Yeah, I saw somebody highlighting. When he saw me, he like put it aside. I was like, I already caught that. Yeah. But collaboration is not forbidden. And, you know, I don't know if it's because I'm lazy, but I prefer discussions. Because it takes better. Because you see, when you start actively articulating what you're reading, you understand it even more. But when you sit in your room and just try to do it by yourself, you know, I'm no Robinson Crusoe. I prefer to be with people. Yeah? Any other questions? Yeah, you were going to ask a question. Sorry.
Some research topics have different results in different contexts.
Yes.
And if I conducted a research,
Yes.
that's previously done with another country.
Yes.
If I did that research with similar method, but I may get different results because of that specific area.
Absolutely.
Is it that research unique or?
Well, no, it's, well, yes and no. Actually, when you look at, remember I told you about there's a paper on the kinds of research contributions you can make. That's at the, let's say, the lower end of the contribution. But at the master's, you're all studying for your master's degrees, right?
No, some of PhDs.
Oh, aha. In that case, we need to have that discussion. Now, if you do a PhD, replicating an extension into a new context is not going to be enough. In that case, I need to send that paper. Actually, I have it on my external hard drive. I'll give it to you before I leave.
I will put it on my tutor.
Yes, you have, those of you doing a PhD, you have to read that paper. Because if you don't know what kind of criteria you'll be judged by, you'll go to court unprepared. Okay, so I'm going to drop that paper with me here before I go. Because you can have a study that is done in another context, and what you're doing is taking that study and replicating it in a different context. And the uniqueness of that context might mean that you might get slightly different results. At the master's level, that's totally legit. At the PhD level, that's still totally legit, but it's the lower end of the contribution scale, which means that to get your PhD, you need to more than just replicate what was previously done. But replication is a good way to learn how to do research. And many journals will publish if you replicate, but you replicate in creative ways, or you introduce it. Look, I moved here 15 months ago. I need to open a new line of research, and what I'm doing right now is just replicating some of the international studies to help me understand how it works here. Because what is accepted internationally might not play out exactly the way it plays out here. There might be some unique things about South Africa that make the phenomenon slightly different. We don't know that yet. So I could do the higher end stuff, but I prefer to start from the baseline studies and see how does all these things that we know about in international real estate practice apply to South African context. And then on that top of that, do more sophisticated stuff gradually. So if you're doing a master's, replicating something that we know already in a new context is perfectly legitimate. If you're doing a PhD, you need to do contributions beyond just replication. Okay? Yes, you have a question?
Well, I'm wrong to say that there's just one reason for just one reason for the research and 4 problem statements in this particular.
No, I said there was one central research question. But that central research question manifests itself in a number of.
I'm still battling to correlate the statement as you said was the problem statement and the 4 methodological contents.
No, first there is the unresolved controversy. Second, there is the fact that previous studies were atheoretical. Third, there is the fact that there were a number of methodological problems with previous studies concerning things like the performance measures they used and all that.
So what do I label that as?
They're different. See, what he's done is that he's not solved just one problem, he solved a number of problems, which is why what I was alluding to is that part of the reason this paper is very good, or this is a mark of an experienced researcher, is that he's tried to solve a number of research problems in one paper. He's found a theory to explain the phenomenon. He's tried to do some empirical studies to help resolve an unresolved controversy. And thirdly, he has adopted methodologies that make up for the defects of previous studies.
When we deal with the contribution, the problem statement, in many areas, it is actually demanded, or many universities demand that at doctoral level, you do a contribution to methodology. Your methodology should be innovative. At a master's level, you can use, remember when we spoke, we will speak about what's the outcomes. The master's level, you can use previously used methodologies. The doctoral level, you have to be innovative, at least innovative about, preferably contribute around methodology.
For example, I use for one of my papers structural equation modeling. Structural equation modeling is factor analysis and regression. You typically find it in management research, you don't find it in real estate research. So one of the things I used was to take something from mainly marketing and management and use it in real estate. Now there's a student writing a master's thesis with me now, and I'm busy lobbying the boss for her to finish that and come and do her PhD. Why? Because she discovered that what she's doing, given the time and the opportunity, she can actually use a method that is used in consumer behavior. So I thought, hey, this is PhD level stuff. If we wrap up this master's thesis, you gotta come back and do the PhD. Now she got upset because she's tired, she wants to go. But you know, the thing has so much potential. I think I've succeeded in convincing her. So I said, okay, good, here's the compromise. We'll wrap up your research report by the end of this month and take the rest of the year off. But next academic year, I think you should register for the PhD because it's totally innovative that she was able to spot something that was done in marketing and now wants to use it to analyze the phenomenon that other real estate researchers have done but used other methods. So I thought, this is PhD level stuff, she needs to come back. And the other reason is that it's difficult to find South African academics in the area, so it would be a big plus for this country to have a local person with a PhD in the subject. So that's going to be a major propaganda coup.
Told you the masters guys, sorry guys, you're on for the trip. Yes. Okay. This is it. Welcome to real life. What we have here is the future doctorate. Some of
Yes.
you in one study and some of you in two.
You know.
So, Sam, in other words, in summarizing, if you are a beginner,
Yes.
maybe in research,
Yes.
you don't know what you're going to research,
Yeah.
you've got to have keywords that will guide you what literature must look for.
Yes.
Then from that, those theories, all the background that you get, if you use this format you gave us, it's going to lead to a research question, then your problem statement, there you know what to
Problem statement, research questions. But typically, the route I suspect you will go is that you're going to be getting a lot of literature, analyzing it according to pre-specified formats, and try to construct a kind of literature review. From the literature review, your problem statement will emerge as a logical conclusion to a literature review if it is well done. And the research questions will follow from it. Because you simply take the problem statement and break it down as a set of specific questions you want to answer. So it's almost like you're operationalizing the problem statement. She will give you a formula. She's created very step-by-step formulas. So look, how many of you have watched Karate Kid? Karate Kid? Okay. This is the one game you have to wax on, wax off. You will get there. I promise you. Just wax on, wax off. Follow the steps, you will get there. I promise you. Okay? Yes.
You just said it wrong. As you have the questions, sometimes it's possible that you would have 1, 2, 3 questions or 4. Then it means when you do your literature review, can you start classifying it according to that?
Yes.
You know, so
Yes.
that then when I read about, let's say, transport from township to where, you know, how it affects whatever, then I look at transport, then I look at the effect of this, then I look at that. So I will have 4 blocks of, you know, of literature review.
Yeah, remember I told you the first exercise that we do after you've read, because we can't start without you reading. We can't start. The first exercise will be very formally after you've reading. Now you haven't yet constructed your literature review as a document, but you've read quite extensively. Okay? The first thing that we now do is we formulate a problem. And you have to then tell us how you're substantiating. There's a format, remember? You'll see it coming up on my tutor when it's up. But there's an assignment specifically, and just go look at the handouts of Thursday. That's your first assignment. You will hand it out, you'll send it in, it will go to your supervisor, you'll get feedback on that, and then you do a very detailed reading. Because when you start formulating, you may find that there are other things that you have to read as well. But there's only a week before you hand that in. So you can't do your reading in a week. So you're now reading and you're starting to work on assignment 2 quite in detail at this point. The third assignment, you'll then take that research problem and construct a question, your central question, and we'll break that down into many questions. Some of those questions you must answer with literature. Some of them you have to deal, what are the assumptions that we're making? Or what are the, if I say sustainability, what do I mean with sustainability? Whose definition am I using?
And that comes from the literature.
But that would be a question. If in your research question, somewhere there's a word sustainability, in your literature you'll get that. So we're breaking it down into questions. We're analyzing those questions. Some of those questions will go into your research, your empirical design. Some of those questions will go purely into your literature review. But you have to go through the literature review to have the background to ask the empirical questions. You're not going to say, you know what about this? I don't care what anybody said about it. Now if you're doing your problem that you will do with your empirical studies at a master's level, you must have some literature on it. You're not expected to create something from scratch.
Or something from work.
At a doctoral level, you will create something. We don't want you to create everything, but that's part of what you do. So it follows a very systematic process that there's exercises in to help you to structure your thinking. Nobody's going to tell you this is your problem. You're going to find it yourself. But
It emerges.
guide you step by step through what you must do to get there. We're not going to say to you, there you go read, come up with a problem statement in your proposal. The proposal that you're developing here is the proposal that you're going to be submitting. And it will be a little bit more structured already so that you can start with your research. So
No,
we're not trying to do double work.
And the superiority of this approach is what she just said a minute ago, which is in most universities, the supervisor just says, go put together something, let me see. As to what steps you should take to arrive there, you assume to have known it by now, as if it comes with age and osmosis. So, I mean, guys, I can tell you this. I schooled in what was supposed to be some of the best universities, but nobody teaches this. Which means, as a PhD student, you're languishing in the dark for years and years and years. Until one day, maybe you chance upon something somewhere. And you're like, damn, why couldn't anybody teach me this? They would have saved me 2 years. Right? So this is, I can tell you, from my own experience as a student, this is really good stuff. Yes, sir.
At the beginning, you had mentioned that the introduction section has 3 parts.
Yes.
But all of a sudden, we're just talking about problem statement. I don't know if you can dissect this introduction to the other 3 parts.
Yes.
Or are they all contained in the problem?
Yes, because there is a problem statement, but there is also the importance of the problem, and that is what I did say was that this guy, the way he wrote the paper, he reversed the sequence. That he started with the research questions and the importance of it before he went into the specific problems that he was trying to solve.
I haven't been able to identify the rest of the 2.
Which ones have you not been able to identify?
I haven't been able to identify the problem and
The
the significance.
significance of the study.
And
Okay.
I can see where the problem is.
Yes, sure. That's fine. Okay. Hold on. Can you open the article? The distribution of rewards has been of interest to organizational scientists, one group of beneficiaries to the study. Have you got it? Organizational scientists, because remember, universities are organizations. So organizational studies have been interested in this. And by implication, since we're talking about universities, university administrators are also beneficiaries of the study, right? So the employing universities at the end of the paragraph are also beneficiaries, aren't they? You got it? So this is a study in organizational design, reward management, and how to get quality out of what happens in universities. So yes, he didn't articulate it explicitly, but you can pick it up from the statements he was making. So if you look at the importance of the study, this is a study that is important from the perspective of organizational design, but it's also a study that is important from a perspective of university educational administration. And it's also a study that is important from the perspective of the application of a particular theory. Because those of you who are into, I don't know who's doing who's doing organizational design here? Anybody doing organizational design here? Nobody's doing organizational design. Anybody doing human resource management? Okay. One area of human resource management will be employee rewards. Now, you know that organizations pay bonuses, especially if you work for private companies. And one of the justifications for that is actually the theory that is used here. Now, it is one of the way science is done is that we use theory to impose structure on what we're trying to understand. Theory allows you to formulate hypotheses and actually test them. That's how science is done. So the fact that early theories have been atheoretical meant that another group of stakeholders have been underserved, the academic community, because previous studies haven't even followed the scientific method strictly because they've been atheoretical. As a matter of fact, somewhere halfway through my PhD, one of my papers that I tried to publish was rejected. And the explanation they gave was that the paper had interesting data, but was atheoretical. That was the first time I heard theory was important. My supervisor never said. So he didn't make explicit statements of who the beneficiaries are, but you can pick it up as you walk through the thing. First, organizational is of interest to organizational scientists. Second, it's of interest to university administrators. Third, it's of interest to academics in the area in the sense that this is how we can apply this particular set of theories to this discussion. But you're right, that is not very explicitly articulated, yes.
Would I be correct to say that's the significance?
Yes, because the significance of the study talks about the benefits and the beneficiaries. Who benefits? What do they benefit? Yeah.
Am I also correct to say that the 4 points you made is this to the purpose of the study?
Sorry, the 4 points.
The 4 points you use to substantiate the problem statement.
Where are we talking about now? You mean these 4 points about the problems with prior studies? That's just 4 of the purposes, because there are more if you look at the previous paragraphs. That he was trying to resolve an unresolved controversy, impose some theoretical structure on it, and improve on the methodological deficiencies in previous studies. So there are like 6, there are about 3 purposes. Because all these things are just more of methodological problems. Yeah. So, which goes back to the bigger point that I made, which was different writers will be more or less explicit. Now, it's easy to pick out these things when you're an experienced researcher. If you're a first timer, you don't even know, how does this paper compare to this paper, right? Like, after you've read the paper that I'm going to give you on research contributions, you'll be in a position to begin to rank papers. Because you can see this guy did contribution on theory, this guy did contribution on theory and methods, this guy did contribution on taking a method that has been used in a particular area and moving into a new area. This guy has been able to provide the definitive proof we need on an issue that has festered among the research community for decades. So what did I do for my PhD? I looked at reward management for real estate firms. We know about reward management for a lot of organizations, but not for real estate. And the little we know about real estate, we only know it for senior executives. But everybody gets paid in the organization, right? So my thing was to extend it to the rest of the organization in a particular industry, and also do some different methods, do it differently, using different methods. And then they let me go. So I was home free, and then I took off. And jumped so high, I landed in South Africa. So, any other questions?
Yes.
Yes.
You also mentioned the fact that the problem is not well understood.
Yeah, it's something we don't. I thought we said it was an unresolved controversy and a phenomenon not well understood. Yes. That was actually where we started from, because we said, where is it now? Yeah, that was when we discussed the nature of the problem. We said it was, first of all, the fact that it gave mixed results meant that one is an unresolved controversy, but also it is a phenomenon that is not well understood, because further evidence actually to that is the 4 issues, the 4 problems they found in prior studies, because then it means that the things hadn't been done rigorously enough to yield definitive conclusions. Some of them use partial performance measures or inadequate performance measures. Some of them excluded some performance measures altogether. So you couldn't read previous studies and say, we know something definitive about the area. Okay. I have to say, this is the first time I really got serious questions discussing this in 4 years. Yeah, you're the most reactive class I've ever taught. Maybe because you're masters and PhD students, right? So you bring a lot more curiosity and experience to this, but I've enjoyed doing this. Thank you very much.